Well, hey there, scholarly gamers, and welcome to this, I would say this week's, but we're not exactly doing a weekly show, are we? To this episode of PC Building Fundamentals. So this episode, I want to talk about choosing a chassis. Now, I use the word chassis rather than a case or enclosure because, let's be honest, I mean, the word case and the word enclosure, they kind of infer that, you know, the computer itself is going to be fully enclosed and protected. And as we can see, that is not always the case. Pardon the pun. You know, a lot of times, you know, a chassis is probably the better way to describe what is housing our PC. And even then, you don't necessarily need to use a chassis. There's plenty of great options out there where you can, I've seen it before where folk have done a custom build and just put it directly on the wall, kind of, you know, like deconstructed the different parts in different areas. Or likewise, you can do a bit of DIY and fit a PC underneath a desk or behind a desk, behind an entertainment stand. There's all sorts of great options out there, especially if you don't mind getting your hands a little dirty and experimenting. For everyone else though, buying a chassis, buying a case, it's quite interesting. It's a very subjective issue. For some people, it's an afterthought. And you know, I get that. You know, if you're more concerned about performance, if you're more concerned about, you know, the actual insides of your PC, then you may very well just be happy to have something that's going to keep all of your components together. And I dare say with most entry-level PCs, you know, if you're just something for you know, your typical browsing the internet, some light gaming, you know, nothing too extreme, you can probably get away with that. Whereas on the other hand, if you're talking about a purpose-built machine, you know, if you want to get into high-end gaming or likewise content creation, streaming, video editing and whatnot, your choice of chassis is actually going to be quite important because there's going to be a lot of features that you are going to be looking for. One of the key features, of course, is cooling. Now, you know, we could go on about this for ages and we could debate which brands are better than others. And look, let's be honest, you know, cases are a very subjective issue. You know, there's, I myself have a few brand loyalties. You know, I can put my hands up and admit that. I've always been a fan of Cooler Master cases for a very long time. I've always felt that they build, you know, good, high quality products. Their prices can vary. You know, yes, they've. If you look at the top of the line Cosmos at the moment, that's a really expensive case. But likewise, you know, down in the lower end, they do have quite affordable cases as well. You know, when I had picked this case, and this is the Cooler Master HAF, which is HAF, stands for High Airflow Evo XB. There was a very specific reason I got this case, and that was because of the desk I had. I had, you know, I had a limited space that I could, you know, have a PC in my house at that time. And what I needed was actually something that wasn't too high. I couldn't get a standard tower. It needed to sit kind of on this little kind of ledge thing at the bottom of the desk. So I was looking for square cases. Now, if you're talking about form factors, right, you know, you can get your different size motherboards, which we'll cover later down the line. You know, there's a lot of kind of boxy cases that are aimed at the micro PCs, right? Your micro ATX, your mini ITX motherboards and whatnot. But when it comes to full-size motherboards, it's quite slim pickings. So I came across the HAF Evo XB and it fit my needs perfectly. You know, so for me, I had basically, you know, I had all of my PC components. I'd been buying them slowly over time. And so the case in that scenario was indeed an afterthought for me. I was like, oh crap, I need something that's going to fit all these things. And it needs to fit in that specific space. And so this brings up the question, you know, should you choose your case or your chassis first, or should you wait till the end? And again, it's really going to depend on what you're putting inside your PC. If you're dealing with a fairly simple setup, you know, just all air cooling, no kind of strange components, if you know what I mean, just, you know, standard sized equipment, you can probably get away with, yes, just getting all of your components and then go trying to find a case that's going to work. If, on the other hand, you've got some custom components, or not to say custom, but a little bit more or less mainstream, for example, water cooling, then you're going to have to be quite methodical which case you get. For example, like with this one, this can fit up to a 280mm radiator in the front of it, so it met my needs perfectly. Plenty of hard drive, mounting options. At the time, I still had a DVD drive because I've got a lot of old games that are still on physical media, so I needed the ability to use my my DVD drive. I don't anymore, but so these are all things that you have to ask yourself, and so it can be quite a good idea to choose your chassis right in the beginning. Now, you might choose one based purely off aesthetics. You might buy one based purely off features, because nowadays not all chassis are created equally. For the most part, most modern ones will come with USB 3.1 on the front, which is extremely handy. But there's some cases that now offer Lightning, which is becoming more and more prevalent as time goes on. Not Lightning, sorry, Type-C, USB Type-C. There are some cases that offer Lightning, but not very many. So these could be features that you require. And likewise, like I said, when you get into water cooling, you need to look at what the available mounting options are. Like this case, for example, if I want to do a custom reservoir, I'm having to go down into the basement of it. There's no real safe place to put one up in the top compartment. Whereas if you look at a huge open chassis like this is the Core P5 from Thermaltake. This is designed specifically for water cooling. Yes, you can get away with doing an air-cooled setup, but it's got perfect spots for reservoirs and pumps and massive radiators. So yeah, spoiler alert, you can already tell probably what my plan is with that chassis and my new build. But it can be quite difficult choosing a chassis, right? So the things you want to look for are, the features, right? On the front, what are the front panel kind of things you need? Again, what comes standard in most cases these days is, a headphone jack, a microphone jack, your USB 3.0 or 3.1s, your USB 2.0s, obviously a power button, a reset button. But there might be some other features that you specifically need. Another good thing to look for is ease of access. What you find a lot of time on cheaper cases, which might look fine, visually, they might be aesthetically pleasing, but they won't have, like quick access, quick release panels. For example, on a Cooler Master brands, they use little thumb screws that are quite easy to get off. But they lock everything in place, but then the panels just, slide out nice and easily, giving you a really easy access, if I can get in there, to the entire PC, which, when you're working on something, if you need to do an upgrade, or likewise, as I'm just about to do here in a little bit, if you need to do your maintenance, your cleaning, these are all things which should affect which case you buy. It's the same when it comes to trying to protect what's inside there. That's the benefit of a traditional case like this, is all of my components inside this case, they're protected by the case itself. And then, you can, dust filters will further protect my investment, because as I've written before, dust is the silent killer of PCs. Now, many people argue this point, saying, I've never once encountered, dust killing a PC. Well, it's probably because you've never encountered a PC that has honestly just been neglected for so long. I've seen it at work, where a PC has been operating for years, absolute years, in a dusty environment with no kind of maintenance, and eventually just dies. Not necessarily due to static, which is one of the concepts of dust, is that it will actually accrue a static charge and possibly kill cause an electrostatic discharge and kill components, but actually just from dust accumulating on components inside fans, inside heat sinks, and things overheating. I've seen some nightmare cases in my time, especially when folk have brought me a PC saying, oh look, hey, this isn't working quite right, can you take a look at it? And as soon as I opened up the side panel, just to be greeted by dust bunnies everywhere. Yeah, it can be quite nasty. But yeah, so things like that, looking for dust filters, that's a good sign of a quality case. Usually they'll be removable, like this one, for example, down in the bottom, if I can get there, has a dust filter for the power supply. And as you can see, I think you'll be able to see that it is definitely doing its job. Need to give that a clean. So dust filters are definitely a good thing to look at for in a case. Obviously, an open design chassis like this, that doesn't exist. These are really kind of more for show, and you have to really be on top of your maintenance. But other things to look for in a chassis, are things like windows as well. Do you really need a window? Do you want someone to see the insides of your PC? It can be quite nice, a conversation piece. Plus, it can be quite aesthetic pleasing for you, the user, just to have your PC looking at you. Now, of course, if you're going to do a window or something, then you need to pay a bit more attention to your wiring, your cosmetics, and possibly even lighting. But that's something to discuss later down the line. But yeah, I think when it comes to a case or a chassis or an enclosure, whatever you want to call it, it should definitely be part of your planning process. Because, again, you might find your dream case. For example, what were those called? The Evolve Shift X, I believe, was a case that I fell in love with. This beautiful kind of skyscraper looking thing. It was quite thin and narrow, but really tall, and a great looking case. But it only accepts a certain size of motherboard. You can't use a full size motherboard in it. You have to go with one of the smaller ones. I can't remember if it was an ITX or a micro ATX or both. So that's a limiting factor. Now, yes, you can still get high performance parts in those form factors, but you're not going to actually get the top of the line equipment. Yes, you can still get a top of the line processor, but what you'll find on most of the smaller motherboards, there'll be a different series of chipset, and you're not going to be able to get the top of the line ones. Performance wise, isn't going to be that drastic of a difference between them, but it's just something to keep in mind. That is why still most builders, if they want to build a top of the line system, will still be choosing one of the larger motherboards. And in fact, if you get into the super high end, the enthusiast level, they've got an even bigger size motherboard, which is eATX, for extended ATX. But again, we'll talk about that more when we discuss motherboards in the near future. But yeah, cases, it is. I get into this argument with people all the time, oh wait, should you buy your case first? Should you buy your case last? And again, it really depends what you are building. I recommend at least factoring it into your plans. If you want to use this size radiator, then that's going to limit your search. It's going to limit what type of case you can use. Likewise, if you want to use a custom water cooling setup, that's going to limit which case you can use. Unless you don't mind modding, getting a Dremel out, doing a bit of cutting, then yeah, if you're going to be doing that, then you can pretty much use whatever the heck you want. But yeah, cases. And again, brands, there's great brands out there. You've got Fantex, of course, Cooler Master, Lee & Lee, Thermal Take, AeroCool. In fact, my stepdaughter's PC, that case was honestly an afterthought. I say that, all the components in it were my leftovers, right? Old parts that I had lying around. And so I wanted to get a case that would do the job, but didn't look crap doing it. So didn't honestly spend a lot of money on that particular case, but I think it does the job quite nicely. It looks, it looks decent enough. So there's options out there for all sorts of different price ranges. To put it in perspective, this case actually cost more than this case. Now, of course, this looks quite empty. You can't see it. It does have a glass panel that screws on the front here to somewhat protect things, and once it has the components on, it'll be transformed quite a bit. So you might think, well, that's why this is more expensive. It has more to it, but it's also because of the features that it has. A very modular design. You can use this as a test bench if you want. You could just strip off all the panels and just have it as your test bench, which is really quite useful. Man, just looking at it, I really need to. Even so, I've got dust filters. It still needs to be dusted a fair bit. But yeah, choosing a chassis. Look for quality products, right? It might be tempting to just buy something cheap from the Far East, or a brand you've never heard of, but remember, there's going to be some key things you'll be missing. Things like your rubber grommets when it comes to your cable management. These simple little things, I mean, they're so good, they're so handy. It just kind of gives a nice little bit of cleanness to your setup. Things like your quick release thumb screws, quick release panels, fan locations, dust filters. These are all things to look at. But then, once you've got your case, then you can actually start trying to figure out what the heck you're going to do with it, what you're going to put inside it. Or as I said, maybe you'll leave it to last. But regardless of what stage of your build you choose a chassis, just keep in mind that choosing a chassis is going to affect other components. Even when it comes to air cooling, nowadays most air cooling heat sinks and fan combinations for the CPU can be exceptionally large, and not all cases will accommodate one as big as that. In this case was exactly the story. By default, this case came with a mesh top panel with a huge fan, which I loved. It was really good setup. But because the fan was on the inside going down, it then limited the size of the heatsink you could use. So those are also things to keep in mind. But yes, cases, there's thousands of them out there, all sorts of different brands, and for the most part, if you're staying with a well-known brand, you can't really go wrong. It's just about making sure you check the compatibilities, make sure that it's going to accommodate the motherboard you're going to buy. Even when it comes into power supply size, some cases, can only accept a certain size of power supply because they do come in different form factors. So these are all things to keep in mind. But anyway, that's really it when it comes to cases. Just buy what you like the look of. Look for reviews from known tech reviewers, trusted reviews and whatnot. Things like Gamers Nexus. They really put the cases through the mill, so to speak. Hardware Unboxed. Who else? Paul's Hardware, BitWet, even Linus Tech Tips occasionally. They don't do cases that often. But yeah, do your research and shop around, because let's be honest, once you've got a case, you're going to be living with it for quite a while, because once you've put it all together, the hassle of having to change your case out, take everything apart and put it back together, ain't nobody got time for that.
Okay, let me just interrupt here for a moment, because I know what you might be screaming at me. You might be saying, AJ, why aren't you talking about, thermodynamics? What about, airflow in a case? And look, you're absolutely right. These are important things. I'm just at this point in time trying to keep things simple. Now, yes, you're absolutely right. When it comes to cooling a PC, there is a lot of questions to be asked. Initially, are you going to air cool? Are you going to liquid cool? And of course, if you're doing air cooling, your setup, your choice of case and fan configuration is of course very important. There's some great advantages to air cooling, and of course there are some disadvantages to air cooling. But there's a specific reason that I kind of didn't mention this initially, because when it comes to choosing a case, once you factor in thermodynamics as well as noise factor, it really, really muddies the waters. And I think, if you're watching these videos, you're probably at a point where things like thermodynamics aren't really that important to you. You just want to build a PC. You want to actually, maybe possibly for the first time, put one together for yourself. So initially, I wouldn't say worry about those things too much. Now, yes, as time goes on and you become more competent and confident when it comes to building a PC, yes, you're going to start looking at doing some advanced things. You're going to look at trying to eke every little tiny bit of performance out of your PC. And then you're going to most likely be looking at more efficient cases. But for the most part, as long as you purchase a case that has a decent, amount of intake fans and exhaust fans, and you actually have solid airflow, and by this I mean, cool air entering the case and a way of exhausting the hot air out of the case, you probably don't have too much to worry about. If you do start encountering cooling issues or overheating issues, then yes, it might be time to readdress your chassis situation and have a look at what we could do, but we'll explore that later. We'll talk about cooling later on in the series. The whole point of this episode is really just to kind of talk about cases, the different kinds, and what to think about when considering that purchase. All right, continue.
Right. So we'll call it for now for PC building fundamentals. Next time, I think we're going to talk about motherboards. I think that seems like the next logical step, right? If we're talking about cases, let's talk about motherboards and actually about the difference in, price ranges, because it's a common misconception that as you pay more money for a motherboard, all you're paying for is more RGB or more superfluous features that you don't really need. Whereas in all reality, you're paying for a lot more than that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time here on PC Building Fundamentals.